Hey, it's Drew, and I'm doing something a little bit different because this is Renegade Thinkers Unite, after all. So today we're live from PSFK. This is part one of that series. I've got two interviews for you, one with Jordan Schenck, who works for a company called Impossible Foods. And maybe you've heard of the Impossible Burger, but we dig into how this meat substitute made from plants is part of a plan to save the planet. So purpose-driven marketing, but still got to sell some burgers. Fascinating conversation. And then we moved into the conversation with Amber Case, who is from MIT and is a big proponent of what she calls calm technology. The idea that technology is in support of humanity and that we don't become slaves to it. And those of you who are waking up and checking your email before you get out of bed, you know what we're talking about here. Anyway, give it a listen. I think you're going to enjoy this part one of the series live from PSFK.
Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
All right, we're live from PSFK, as I've mentioned before, my favorite conference of the year. And right now, I'm with Jordan Schenck, who is the head of global consumer marketing for Impossible Foods. And I just had the pleasure of seeing Jordan talk about the growth of Impossible Foods. And she was the first marketer there and spent the last 3 years scaling the brand, I guess, essentially from zero to wherever you are. So we're going to jump into that. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Drew.
Quite a surprise. It's like I grabbed her in the hall and said, we need to talk. So anyway, let's, first of all, I suspect that not everybody who's listening knows what Impossible Foods is or have heard of the Impossible Burger. So just what is it?
The quick intro. So Impossible Foods is a company that introduced a product to market about 2.5 years ago known as the Impossible Burger. We first launched the product in New York City with Chef David Chang, and since then have scaled the company nationally, working with chefs, but most recently moving into brands like White Castle, where we're serving the product on menu there. So we've been rolling and doing that. The company has a big audacious mission. It's not only to change the way the planet looks from outer space, but to actually replace animal farming by the year 2035.
And what was interesting to me is you did spend a lot of time in your presentation talking about the global problem that the founder wants to address, and and there were some startling facts about how many cows there are in the world, and I hadn't really thought about that, and the amount of space that they take up, and of course the methane. So solving that problem is sort of one burger at a time, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, for me, even first being introduced to Impossible Foods more in the consulting capacity, it was eye-opening to know that this problem existed. Our founder, Dr. Pat Brown, brilliant man, formerly brilliant Stanford academic, founded all of these things that had nothing to do with food, but recognized that 50% of the world's usable land goes to animal farming, 25% of the world's fresh water, 1 in 8 every living animal on planet Earth is a cow.
That's all too many cows.
And inclusive of that, you've got an emissions footprint that is the same size as the entirety of the transportation industry. That's planes, trains, and automobiles. And this is a problem that we're not talking about. And we're sitting here saying, the ice caps are melting and we have food scarcity issues. Fresh water is disappearing all over the world. And yet we continue to eat meat, and every growing middle class across the world continues to demand meat at a greater rate than we could have ever imagined. And we're about to have to feed, 13 billion people. And it's a big problem that we're sitting in front of. It
is a big problem. And what's interesting to me, and I want to go back to something you said earlier, when you launch this product, it's really, you're still selling food. And so the fact that you started with a celebrity chef who is known for cooking food that is good to eat from a taste and sensory standpoint, you had to start there, right? You have to prove that this is a tasty product.
Yeah. I mean, what we knew intuitively, but even in research, if you do any segmentation, it would tell you immediately, go straight for the vegan Whole Foods consumer. That's where they live. But in fact, we're a mission-led company. So we are not so much worried about the 7% that only eat plants. We're worried about the 93% that love meat, and they love bacon, and they love cheese, and they love towers of like chicken legs. Like there's this kind of excess that this world functions in. And so for us, it's always been about taste first and proving that not only is the product delicious, but it's relevant in the space that's relevant to you. One of the big decisions we made early on, which was also counterintuitive to a plant-based company, was we handed the product over to chefs to cook in any way, shape, or form. They could put cheese on it. They could put bacon on it. They could do whatever they wanted because it was about their interpretation and getting this product to have space within culture and within their kind of culinary world. So that was something that we did. And as you can imagine, launching a brand in that way, you take yourself out of the equation, which is a very scary thing to do initially. And obviously putting it in front of people on tables with chefs who are cooking it, another crazy thing to do. In sands of messaging, no branding, all of those things, we were there, but it allowed people to feel connected to something in a completely different way where they didn't have to hear the scary facts.
So going with the David Chan, is Impossible mentioned on the menu, that it's made with Impossible?
It is. So that's actually scaled a lot over time. What we found, which was a pretty amazing thing with the subtleties of branding, we actually use these flags that a lot of people know the brand for that would sit in the burgers or they sit in the meatballs. We had branding on menu. It would say made with Impossible or Impossible Burger if it was. And chefs were choosing to do that, and consumers were actually buying based off of that pretty early on, which is also another strange thing to happen when you're not going direct to consumer, but actually finding that people had the curiosity around the name, around the presentation that chefs were committing to on menu. And obviously for me, that's, the co-marketing aspect of it is just, it's a free placement at the end of the day, which is pretty cool.
Hey, it's Drew. I wanted to use this break to ask you a single question. Are you a courageous marketer? Do you have the courage to go to your board of directors and say, marketing could drive the growth of this company? We just need 3 times the budget. Do you have the courage to take the big idea that you already have and extend it internally and externally through influencers, through the media, through all of your content? If you're a courageous marketer but aren't sure how to roadmap all of this, I have a big idea for you. It's called Renegade Thinking. It's a program that we've developed and work with exclusively for B2B marketers, generally at large companies. And I want to give you my cell phone, 917-679-8852. Just text Renegade Thinking to 917-679-8852. And we can talk about how you can cut through. So as an ingredient brand, I mean, you think of Intel as one of the most famous ingredient brands, and certainly they've invested a lot to the fact that point we all know they're mnemonic, bing, 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 right? Yeah. We all. What's interesting when we went from this celebrity chef who's known for high-end culinary, and the next thing you mention is White Castle, known for, cheap sliders. How does the brand maintain its integrity with that vast of a sort of source for the product?
And ultimately, it starts with just thinking about what a burger stands for. A burger, like pizza, is one of the most ubiquitous things. You can be as high end as possible to as low end as possible, or in your own home. And I wouldn't even say low end. It's a cultural icon. It spans every single entity. And for us, while we did go premium early on, the mission of the product has to go to places where it's available for $1.99. And White Castle is fundamentally a great brand. It's a brand that has been at the heart of counterculture. It represents a lot of really interesting points of view, and they're always open and playful. So for us, it was a natural transition to work with a place like White Castle because it still had that point of view, and they weren't afraid to take risks. They had the Harold and Kumar moment. They own the late night. They've got all of this stuff going on that it felt like a good fit. And, we really with the brand, we didn't want to be, again, too precious to it. It's something that should be playful, and it shouldn't just be, for the few that can have it. It's just a burger.
Yeah,
it's the great equalizer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if some folks believe that the original burgers were actually made by putting meat under a saddle, and they think it was like Genghis Khan or one of the folks from the high steps were putting this meat under a saddle and riding all day, and it would sort of ground down and break the meat, and somehow or other, that's how burgers came into being.
There are so many ways that I've heard burgers come into being. I have not heard that one yet.
Yeah, well, there's some,
That one after.
Yeah, you will. There's some truth.
The ground meat saddle.
Yeah, the ground meat saddle from Genghis Khan, and yes. So, okay. Let's talk about now the big challenge for you moving forward is how do you get to this next level? And we talked a little bit about awareness, building awareness. And as an ingredient brand, you're only as good as the distribution right now that you have, right?
So again, we've been an ingredient brand, but we've always been a consumer brand, regardless of where we sit, whether it's in the food service space, like we could be retail one day, we just launched in Hong Kong and we've gone internationally. It's still a consumer brand. So for us, and some of the stuff you saw at the end of the presentation, we're right on the cusp of starting to tell that message. Most of what we've done over the past couple of years has just been proving market, that people would actually line up to buy this thing. And sure enough, they did. So now we've got a lot of advocates. Several million have tried the product over time, and there's about to be several million more. So let's start to tell them a message that they can stand for. And that's where you'll probably see in the coming months us getting a bit more into this space of how do we start thinking about Earth without ever saying Earth? Or how do we feel like we're back to being a part of this planet without ever feeling like it's the line in the sand? Just like I showed you the meat spectrum.
Yes.
We've got an exercise at scale where we essentially have to create this spectrum of making people feel good about the decisions they make for the Earth without ever putting too much of a line in the sand.
Well, and that's interesting. And I think that if we were to sort of wrap this up in the lessons of being a purpose brand are not always pushing that right at the front, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about if you had a folks that were starting a new business and wanted to be a purpose-driven company and solve some of the major problems of the world, how to balance that. And, we're in your case, you're selling a burger.
I mean, it's as simple as that. I think it's really easy when you have mission-led products to fall into that. For us, that was always the easy way in. And I feel like many people would take the easy way in, but know that your early adopters are always going to be there for you. And that, in fact, if you push for the stretch demographic, early adopters will follow, and in fact, you're going to get everyone along the way. So for us, going into meat eaters and focusing on talking to meat eaters meant we couldn't play into the tropes of what our early adopters would find relevant, but in fact, what was more relevant was Ghostface Killah performing at a White Castle, or David Chang eating this, or Questlove, falling in love with the product. It had much more to do with the relevance within culture, an interesting product, but also just really good food, and letting that play out, and then letting the right people tell the narrative instead. But again, you have to pull your preciousness out of it and do some things that might make you uncomfortable, but know that people are going to receive it more because they feel the realness of that decision.
I think it's so interesting. So I interviewed Daniel Lebetsky, founder of Kind. He's in my book. Unfortunately, it was before I had the podcast, but just your perspective is very much in common with what he had to say. Is like, no matter what, it's got to be amazingly good tasting. And no matter how much good charity that we do, none of that matters relative to the product that people are putting in their mouths.
And it's not just the taste of it. I mean, for us, it's the world around it. It's the experience at which you have. Food is not just we've done a number of these conversations with people, and oftentimes what we found, and when we've done other talks, our founder will ask this question, like, how many of you think about the meat when you eat something? And you really don't. You think about the ingredients or the environment and all of these kind of relevant touch points that go into experiencing food that is also our responsibility. And it's why restaurants was such an interesting place to go first, is that you could show people that the world and the context around the brand was real and normal in a diner or where have you. So it's really cool with food.
And so as you sort of think about this, has there been one big surprise to you, sort of one sort of or key insight? We've talked about not being precious and the importance of food. Is there anything else, if you have a group of marketers listening to this, that you would say, wow, I never, when I was at Wieden & Kennedy, I never saw this one coming?
The biggest insight I would go back to is it's not just preciousness. I had it in the presentation today, but it's that, Americans will put anything in their mouth at least once, I would say. So knowing that takes the pressure off of worrying too much about all of these things that maybe went into making something, that people are actually more open to try things than you would assume. And that actually kind of played into the fact that people were more open to get behind something that was made for plants than one would assume. So the entire thought exercise of Impossible has been surprising and shocking to me as a marketer, but I mean, that insight is relatively true.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting, is that they're prepared to try it. And I'm just thinking about plants. It's funny because I happen to be wearing my Allbirds shoes that are made from plant fiber as well. And so, who knows what else is going to be made from plant fiber soon. I mean, this is
plants are the original and the oldest technology on planet Earth.
And I love that. I think we've covered this pretty well. Well, first of all, congratulations for the success to date. And those anybody who has a brand name Impossible is always welcome on Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Amazing. It's been really fun. Thank you, Drew. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from, top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
My next guest is Amber Case. I just saw her speak. It's really fascinating. She calls herself a cyborg anthropologist, and she studies the interaction between humans and computers and how our relationship with information is changing the way cultures think, act, and understand their worlds. Case is currently a fellow at Harvard University's Beekman Klein Center for Internet and Society, and a visiting researcher at the MIT Center for Civic Media. She knows a thing or two about computers and humans. Let's just talk about this calm technology and what this means to marketers.
Sure. Well, calm technology is the idea that we should focus on being human instead of take all of our attention away from ourselves by focusing it on machines all the time. The idea is that devices kind of outnumber us, and the notifications have gone from being in the background and helping us to focus to taking our focus away. And that doesn't mean that we have a lot of time left to be creative or silly or human. We end up being this kind of part of the singularity that ends up becoming just kind of part of the same thing, over time. And so the idea behind the original promise of technology was to give us more free time. And instead, we wake up next to our devices, they cry and ring, and we have to pick them up and soothe them back to sleep. We look at them before we do our significant other in the morning, and we find ourselves not being able to sleep as well, not being able to think as well. Our productivity is going down. It all comes back to Greek concepts of time, one being chronos and one being kairos. Chronos time is this kind of industrialized time where you have this appointment at 9 a.m. for this specific purpose. But then Kairos time is equally as important, and when we don't have enough time for Kairos time, which is the time of falling in love, looking at a sunset, coming up with an insight, the time outside of time, then we just have one type of time. And so it becomes important to have this kind of mix. And what tech right now has done in its adolescent phase is just take all of our attention away. And that doesn't mean that, it's inherently bad. It just means that we're a little bit out of balance. And some of the best brands in history have been great brands because they've been very well designed. They don't take our attention. We just know that we need that particular, Philips razor or a specific television or Smeg fridge or, mid-century modern furniture because it's well designed, thoughtful for people. And then that stands the test of time, and those companies do incredibly well. Companies like, Dyson, who makes a quieter vacuum cleaner, who makes less intrusive devices, is going to do a lot better in the long term than somebody who says, well, we'll just make a cheap knockoff product, exist for a year, and then go under.
So many different things that you said that I think are interesting, and I find I'm going to focus on the creativity or the lack of creativity that computers have sort of forced us into. And I noticed yesterday we were having a little brainstorming session, and 4 of the people in the room brought their computers. I brought a white pad with nothing on it, and they're busy typing down their notes and so forth. And I have noticed that when I'm typing, I'm not creative. For the most part, it's very hard if you're really trying to blue sky and connect things that can't connect. And so there's this sense this is a new generation that basically they can't do anything without their machine.
Well, it's harder to do something without a machine if you've been trained to do it. And I mean, one of the things that, like, all the best designers that I know, young or old, I actually hired for my startup a bunch of print designers. They were in their 20s, and they'd only done print design, and they'd barely touched a computer. And they were in this print design tradition with printing presses and white space and letter setting. So when they decided to take that methodology to the web, they crafted that code. They made it beautiful, supportable, maintainable, easy to read, easy to change. They designed it as if they were designing a set of letters for somebody, right? And they took a little bit longer, but over time that maintenance became faster. So to look at some of the people who do the best work, there's this kind of tradition that takes a longer time, writing well, versus writing fast, or writing the least amount to get the point across instead of the most. What is the difference between, like, Pulitzer Prize winning journalism and, a really fast story on BuzzFeed about 10 things you need to wear tomorrow? And one might take 6 months to write, but that will be remembered. So the question is, what's going to be remembered in the long term? And what meaning do we have anymore, I guess? It's kind of philosophical.
Well, no, okay. So I'm going to jump around. So we would talk about how, machines have sort of taken over our lives. That's one interesting thing. And so from a marketer standpoint, just if you're a CMO, chief marketing officer, just turning off the machines, or at least putting a place in your day where there's nothing. So you can just let your mind go, which I think is an interesting thing. Now I'm going to jump ahead because I know you have feelings on this. So there's a lot of conversation about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the use of that in marketing. And to me, the most interesting thing is one of the things that you said on stage today, which is it's not about replacing humans. It's about so robotics, if you think about it differently, it's about helping and aiding. There's still a human at the other end of that. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think this is one of the most important concepts, that technology should augment our abilities, not replace them. Because we have been the ones that have turned into robots. We're the robots. We talk about robot rights. We're the robots, so where's our rights? Where's our right to have an hour without a computer? Where's our ability to not have to respond to that email and have, kind of email apnea that happens where you stop breathing when you check your inbox because you're terrified? We need these kind of human breaks, because we just can't think as well if we're constantly bombarded. So if we think about, how technology is constructed right now is we have these expectations of perfect AI from movies. That those are scripted, and it will never be perfect like that. It will never think like us. Humans have trouble understanding each other to begin with. Who's to say that technology could understand us better than ourselves? We have, 2 million years of history as humans, and we still can't understand each other? But what tech can do is help us smooth the interactions between ourselves, get us to connect to more people, get us to connect to people with similar interests instead of just getting us to fight with each other because of a misunderstanding. It can help translate between cultures. But if it does our jobs, we lose out on the ability to maintain that. First generation automation is fine because you still have people that remember how to, maintain the machines and they remember how to build them. But second generation, when you never learned the culture and the maintenance models or anything of these original machines, you have nothing and you have no purpose. And there are a lot of people that are like, well, I didn't learn the beginnings of this thing. I don't really, you have these people on internet binges. Oh, I'm really excited about this thing. And then a day later, they don't remember a thing. So to do something deep and well and to take the time to think, I tell people, if you're going to go on an internet binge, maybe on a piece of paper, write down what you learned or what you did. And it's so hard because we don't use that comprehension part of our brain as much as we do the consumption. On the early web, we created, On the early web, we created more than we consumed, and now we just consume by default. So how do we get that so that we do a little bit more hard work where there's reward and purpose? And, brands can support that. Brands can help us get our time back if they want to. But they're going to have to think about different senses and different modes of interaction and different tempos. If they can get us to slow our lives down a little bit and give us some of that time, wow, they'll do really well.
It's so interesting. Several things that come to mind. One is that this notion, a lot of marketers have what are called content calendars. And so they see that calendar and they feel, well, we got to have content. So they're cranking it out every day. And I think the smart marketers are realizing it's not about, there's so much out there. It's really create something great, even if it takes longer. Okay. So one of the things that you might find interesting is in every episode, I ask the chief marketing officer in this little speed fire conversation, I say, do you think a machine will ever be able to do their job? And for the first 8 times I asked that, they said, no way. The last 2 people I've interviewed have said, yeah.
Yeah. So when I've gone to all these trend research and marketing conferences, the number one thing is that you just have to look at a more evolved industry. And the most evolved industry, I think, is security and fraud. So you go to a fraud conference and the trade show floor is very specific. 80% of the companies do automation, 20% do human. Because there's stuff that no matter what you can't automate. And so the cleverness is to know what you can automate and what you can't. And to have the intelligence to know the difference, but you have to understand that no matter how much quantitative analysis you do, there's still the qualitative that you need to do. And I mean, my favorite story is this. There's this pet store, and nobody's buying the pet treats. And so this store says, we'll remove the pet treats. Because according to our quantified data, you can't have, this isn't working. So then they have an anthropologist go into the store. The anthropologist says, oh, the pet treats are on the top shelf. Who buys pet treats? Kids and grandparents, and so nobody can reach it. Neither of those demographics can reach the pet treats, and no one's going to ask for the pet treats. They just leave. So let's put the pet treats in a different location. Could the data tell you that? Absolutely not. Could a person tell you that? Absolutely. So as long as you mix, you can do 80-20, 80% automation, but you have to have the human in the loop, or you miss out on the insights, and you end up having a flat system that eats itself, the snake eating its tail. So no matter what, we can't automate everything, and we shouldn't. Because if we do, we end up on a phone tree forever for the rest of our life.
And we all hate that. So Amber, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Great to be here.
You're listening to Renegade Thinkers Unite. Find us at renegadethinkersunite.com.
Okay, so we just heard from 2 very interesting ladies, Jordan Schenck and Amber Case. And as I think about those as from a marketing perspective, obviously lots of insights from Jordan, not being too precious with the brand, making sure that at the beginning of the introduction that they got some high-end influencers to bless the taste of the product, but then moving right on to distribution at White Castle, which is sort of the extreme end, if you will, of the culinary universe. Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting conversation. And Amber Case, I think the important part of this is that as we become increasingly dependent upon technology as marketers, we always have to remember and technology and data is in service of us, and we're not slaves to that. So just in case you needed a reminder of that, you got it loud and clear. Anyway, as always, let us know what you think of the show, and if you have any suggestions for other guests you'd like us to explore. In the meantime, until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.